The station clock read 4:57 in the afternoon when everything changed. Hundreds of travelers rushed across the polished floor, dragging suitcases and chasing the final departures before an unexpected storm shut down nearly every rail line across the region. Amid the noise and confusion stood a young man with only one ticket left in his hand, the last seat on the final train leaving before the tracks closed for the night. It was the ticket he had waited weeks to buy, the ticket that would take him to the hospital where his younger sister was finally being discharged after months of treatment. But just a few feet away, he noticed a stranger whose face carried the kind of heartbreak no one could fake. She wasn't crying for herself. She was desperately trying to reach home before her elderly father underwent emergency surgery the next morning. In one impossible moment, he had to decide whose pain mattered more. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and silently handed her the ticket that would change both of their lives forever. Before we continue this unforgettable story, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to the channel Soulful Tales2. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change a life, and stories like this remind us why humanity still matters. The young man's name was Callan Mercer, a quiet 34-year-old carpenter whose life had never been easy. After losing his parents several years earlier, he had become both brother and guardian to his younger sister, Mara. Every spare dollar he earned repairing old homes and building furniture went toward helping her recover from a rare illness. He had skipped meals, sold his motorcycle, and worked weekends without complaint because family had always meant more to him than comfort. That afternoon, after finishing a long contract in another city, he finally had enough money for a train ticket home. His sister was supposed to leave the hospital the next morning, and he had promised he would be there waiting outside with her favorite flowers. The woman standing beside the ticket counter was named Celine Ashford. She wore a long camel-colored coat that was soaked from the rain outside, and her suitcase rested beside trembling hands. Every few seconds she glanced toward the departure board before looking helplessly at the station employee, who kept repeating the same heartbreaking words. The train was full. There were no more seats. Every other route had been cancelled because of flooding farther north. Callan could have walked away. Instead, something inside him refused to let him ignore the desperation in her eyes. When he quietly asked what had happened, Celine explained that her father had suffered a sudden heart attack that morning. Doctors had scheduled emergency surgery for sunrise, and she feared he would believe she had abandoned him if she failed to arrive that night. Her voice cracked as she admitted she had spent her savings caring for him after her mother passed away 2 years earlier. Missing this train felt like losing one final chance to tell him she loved him before the operation. Callan looked down at the ticket in his hand. It was everything he needed. It was everything she needed more. Without asking for recognition or thanks, he simply placed the ticket into her hand. For several seconds she stared at it in complete disbelief, convinced she had misunderstood. When she realized he was serious, tears filled her eyes. She tried to refuse, but Callan only smiled gently and assured her that somehow he would find another way home. She disappeared through the boarding gate moments before the doors closed. Then the train pulled away. Only after it vanished into the rain did the reality settle over him. He had nowhere to sleep. His wallet contained barely enough money for a sandwich and a cup of coffee. Every hotel near the station was already full because hundreds of stranded travelers were searching for rooms. Even the waiting area was beginning to close for overnight maintenance. As darkness approached, the station manager apologized but explained that everyone needed to leave. For the first time in years, Callan had absolutely nowhere to go. The rain became heavier as evening settled over the city. He wandered several streets carrying his worn backpack, searching for somewhere dry enough to wait until morning. His phone battery died, leaving him without directions or a way to contact his sister. The cold wind pushed against him while thunder echoed across the skyline. Eventually he found a small neighborhood church whose porch offered shelter from the storm. He sat quietly on the wooden steps. He wasn't angry. He wasn't regretting his decision. He simply hoped the stranger had reached her father in time. An elderly pastor noticed him sitting outside and invited him inside for a warm meal. Volunteers served homemade soup, bread, and tea to anyone stranded by the weather. During dinner the pastor learned Callan's story. Instead of praising him, the old man simply smiled and said that kindness has a strange habit of finding its way back, even when we never expect it. Callan appreciated the words but assumed they were simply meant to comfort him. He had no idea how true they would become. Meanwhile, Celine arrived safely at her hometown just before midnight. Her father was awake when she reached the hospital, and the relief on his face erased every mile of the exhausting journey. She stayed beside him through the night, holding his hand until he finally drifted to sleep. Only then did she remember the man who had sacrificed everything for a stranger. She realized she hadn't even asked his last name. The next morning, her father's surgery was declared a success. Instead of celebrating immediately, Celine called the railway company hoping they could identify the passenger who had surrendered his ticket. Privacy policies prevented them from sharing his information, but one employee remembered seeing Callan leave the station carrying only a backpack. Feeling responsible, the employee mentioned that a local church had opened its doors to stranded travelers during the storm. Celine drove there immediately. She arrived just as volunteers were cleaning the dining hall. Callan was helping stack chairs. When he looked up and recognized her, surprise spread across his face. She thanked him over and over, explaining that because of his decision she had reached the hospital before the surgery. Her father had survived, and she would never forget the gift he had given their family. Callan simply smiled and said he was glad everything turned out well. Then she noticed the same backpack still resting beside him. He had spent the entire night at the church. Guilt washed over her. Without hesitation she insisted he come home with her family for breakfast before catching another train. At first he politely refused, not wanting to intrude. But the pastor quietly encouraged him to accept, reminding him that sometimes allowing others to repay kindness is also an act of generosity. Celine's family home stood on a quiet country road surrounded by tall maple trees glowing beneath the morning sun after the storm. It was warm, peaceful, and filled with the comforting smell of fresh bread. Her father, Gideon Ashford, had already returned home after doctors approved his early discharge. Though still weak, he embraced Callan with tears in his eyes after hearing what had happened. That breakfast stretched into lunch. Lunch turned into the afternoon. Every member of the family treated Callan as though he had always belonged there. They laughed together. Shared old photographs. Told stories around the dining table. For the first time since losing his parents, Callan experienced the feeling of sitting inside a complete family again. It stirred emotions he thought he had buried forever. When evening approached, another landslide forced all remaining trains to stop until the following morning. Celine's father insisted there was no discussion left to have. Callan would stay the night. Although embarrassed at first, he accepted their kindness with gratitude. That evening became unforgettable. The family gathered on the back porch watching the sunset paint the fields in gold. Gideon spoke openly about life, forgiveness, and the importance of choosing compassion even when the world rewarded selfishness. He admitted that years earlier he had ignored a stranger asking for help because he had been too busy chasing success. Days later he learned the man had died from exposure during a winter storm. The regret had haunted him ever since. Listening quietly, Callan realized that kindness is rarely convenient. Its greatest value appears precisely when it costs us something. The next morning, before leaving for the station, Gideon handed Callan a small wooden box. Inside rested an old carpenter's compass that had belonged to Celine's grandfather. Callan tried to refuse such a meaningful family heirloom, but Gideon insisted it now belonged to someone who understood its true value. The compass wasn't meant to point north. It was meant to remind its owner always to choose the direction of compassion. Callan finally returned home later that afternoon. His sister Mara ran into his arms the moment she saw him. She never cared that he had arrived one day late. She only cared that he was safe. When he shared the story, she smiled through tears and told him she wasn't surprised. Helping others had always been who he was. Months passed. Callan and Celine stayed in touch, first through letters, then phone calls, and eventually regular visits between their towns. Their friendship grew slowly, built not on dramatic promises but on shared respect, quiet understanding, and gratitude for the unlikely way their lives had crossed. Years later, whenever anyone asked how they first met, neither of them spoke about romance. They spoke about one train ticket. One impossible decision. One stranger willing to walk into uncertainty so another person could make it home. That single act had connected two families forever. It reminded everyone who heard their story that kindness rarely ends where we think it does. Sometimes the smallest sacrifice becomes the beginning of someone else's miracle. Sometimes giving away what seems impossible to lose opens doors we never imagined existed. And sometimes spending one unexpected night with strangers reveals the family we never knew life was preparing for us. Before we reach the end, we'd love to hear from you. Please comment below with one word, kindness, if you believe even one selfless act can change a lifetime. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of someone special, or restored your faith in humanity, please like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to Soulful Tales 2. Your support allows more inspiring stories of hope, compassion, and second chances to reach people who may need them most. Because in the end, people rarely remember how much money someone earned, what job they had, or what possessions they owned. They remember the moments when someone chose compassion over convenience, generosity over comfort, and love over fear. And somewhere, in a small wooden box resting on a carpenter's shelf, an old compass still reminds one ordinary man that the greatest journeys in life never begin with a ticket. They begin with a single choice to be kind when no one is watching.